Well, a 15-year-old is expected to be charged with murder today. This is Robert Fairby, and he's accused of pulling the trigger in a deadly shooting that killed a man back in February. We understand that victim was shot and killed in his garage on Los Feliz Street near Lake Mead Boulevard. And court documents reveal that after the shooting, Fairby told his roommate that he, quote, got away with murder because he was wearing latex gloves. Well, he was eventually connected to the crime, which investigators believe had something to do with marijuana money. Fairby is being charged as an adult.